Encourage every one of you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Acts, the 22nd chapter. We're in our study of the book of Acts that Luke wrote. And in this 22nd chapter, we see Paul standing before the Jews, and he'll be standing before the council, the Sanhedrin. It's interesting to see the events transcribed here surrounding his coming to Jerusalem and being in prison. And we're going to be seeing how that unfolds as he'll be going to Caesarea and then eventually to Rome. And so he's going to be involved in spreading the gospel, and it'll be a different way than he anticipated. Last time we looked at why he would say what he said, beginning with verse 17. He speaks about being in a trance. When you're in a trance, you don't just hear something, you see something. He saw and heard the Lord, which is an interesting point that he was the Lord, and I think is Jesus Christ, because the testimonies concerning him. It came to pass when I had returned to Jerusalem, I was praying in the temple, and I fell in a trance, and I saw him saying unto me, as he pictures him saying something to him, make haste and get thee quickly. So he's emphasizing, he doubles down. Make haste, get quick, be quick, and make haste, get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, because they will not receive of thee the testimony concerning me. So immediately Paul is stating this publicly, but he is saying, and I said, this is what I said to the Lord. They themselves know that I imprison and beat every one in the synagogue. I imprison people, beat in every synagogue, not everyone, but beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. Yeah, that's why you need to leave Jerusalem. Why does he say that? Because he's saying, Lord, I believe what you're saying. Or was he trying to say that I'm going to be giving pretty good testimony because I've been on their side? There must be some evidence that causes me to change, because I had more zeal than the rest of them. And what he did. What did he do to Stephen? He didn't stop Stephen's death, did he? Yes, sir? And I agree with that. He was holding the coach. That means he was consenting. He says those are two different things. He says those are two things that are emphasized together. But could it be also the fact he could have been a part of the groups? He was standing by. It says that he was standing by, consenting unto his death, even holding the garments that he had, and conjunctions, distinct thoughts brought together as one. I was standing by and consenting and keeping the garments of them that slew him. Well, if you just kept the garments, we know you'd be consenting. He consented. I've been there. Stephen deserved to be put to death, and I held the garments of those who stoned them. So there's that I was standing by, and he wasn't doing anything to change that. He was consenting to his death. He was holding his garments. He was standing by watching this be done. And therefore he was one that said, I've been on that side. What would change such a man? I think he's giving emphasis to say, Lord, I think they could listen to me. And of course he says in verse 21, depart. And our question that we're looking at in number 10 on our questions, to whom was the Lord going to send Paul? And that was to the Gentiles. And we see that in verse 21. And when the audience gave, number 11, and they gave him audience unto this word, and they lifted up their voice and said what to him? Yeah, he doesn't deserve to live, right? He's not worthy, not fit that he should live. So they're rejecting his testimony, even though he may have thought this might be good. The Lord said, get out here quickly. The Lord's always right. And so he is involved in realizing here's how the crowd is turning against him. So that's how they respond to his speech. They weren't impressed with him, weren't impressed with his turnaround. And he was one that was really worthy to die from what he had said. He talked about being baptized. He talked about all these things, being blinded, and all of the things that happened to him as his testimony, but it was not received, was it? Now, we look at question number 12. What procedure did the chief captain command? So here's the mob, and here you got the chief captain. He becomes very important in our account of this part of Paul's stay in Jerusalem. That he was leader of dealing with the army, and as they were keeping the peace according to Caesar's rules and in Jerusalem. We'll see that there is a barracks there. Some of your versions have castle. It's where they would store the ammunition, they would store the army, their barracks would be there, and they kind of had control over that with that army connected there. Jews didn't like that. They didn't like to be occupied by the Romans, and especially the army. And so, but this is what was there, and it was to kind of keep the peace. So here's a mob. Verse 23, and as they cried out, they threw off their garments, cast dust in the air, and the chief captain commanded him to be brought unto the castle, American Standard says, new versions to the barracks where they keep the soldiers, bidding that he should be examined by scourging. So what procedure was being used? What do you know about scourging? What is that? Is this a beating? Sometimes the whips had bones in it at the tips, and sometimes had pieces of metal objects that would tear the skin in the back. We know that they had leather thongs using on Paul, and that was a lot of times to stretch that back around a pole, make things tighter, so the lashes would be more hurtful and dig deeper and all of those things. And that, yes, Tito? They did. They became weak, didn't they? They lose a lot of blood, but they became weak. We know Jesus was in a weakened condition because he couldn't carry his own cross. And but a lot of people died under this scourging. But it was a part of examination. We're gonna beat the truth out of you. You hurt bad enough, you're going to tell us the truth. And that's what was being considered as being appropriate action. But it wasn't appropriate for Roman citizens. And that becomes the drama that we see here. So what we see in our next question is that what caused the chief captain to be afraid? How did he know? Or did Paul tell the centurion? And the centurion tells the chief captain. When the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, bidding that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know for what cause they shouted against him. And when he had tied him up with thongs, Paul said to the centurion. Now, who's the centurion? He's in the Roman army, but he's over 100 people, right? He has over 100 people, 6,000 in a legion of the army. But here's he speaks. And this is so interesting to me that there's every centurion that's mentioned in the New Testament has good character. Every one of them. And yet they weren't Jews. They were people of Roman descent here, or the Greeks. But they're honorable characters. And so here's the centurion that stood by, and he says to the centurion, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is what? A Roman and uncondemned. See, we're going to get the truth out of you. Nobody's condemned me. This is how you're going to examine me to see if I'm guilty or not. It wasn't punishment. It was to hurt, to make sure you tell us the truth of what really is the cause here. The mob has one thing, but we're going to see is that deserving or not. And when the centurion heard that, he went to the chief captain. As Nathan says, chief captain knows this, and he says, and he told him, saying, what art thou to do? He says, what art thou about to do? For this man is a Roman. So with the thongs, he's ready to be tied against that. He just, hey, Here's a commander of 100 men. You know what's getting ready to happen? Is lawful to do that to a Roman citizen? And the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? So the chief captain is involved as he's speaking now to Paul. But initially, it's the centurion that gets things going. And he lets that be known. He says, Tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, Yes. And the chief captain answered with a great sum of money. We'll talk about that in a moment. I've obtained this citizenship, but what does Paul say? I'm born that way. Born a Roman citizen. And when they were about to examine him again, straightway they departed from him. The chief captain also was afraid. What caused the man to be afraid is that he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him to be examined by scourging, he would be involved in doing that. So here's an example where Paul deals with secular law, Roman law, in order to avoid a very painful scourging. And sometimes he says, I'm ready to die, whatever happens with the government of those things. And a lot of times when the government was trying to tell the apostles not to do something, if it conflicted with God's will, they always put God's will first. But here's appealing to law of a nation, of people, that he used to benefit, that he would avoid the persecution, that he would avoid the punishment that is being done. And I think that is instructive too, when nations, their governments turn against what we're trying to do as Christians, that indeed we can appeal to the laws upon the books that we might have. And especially one during COVID, one was pretty obvious of the way that the government was working. I think it would have played out in the courts, would be the idea of the shutting down churches, but they were keeping other businesses open. And what's the reasoning with that? We're going to contaminate everybody. We're going to kill everybody if we assemble. And yet you're going to Home Depot, and you're going to some of them with strip clubs, and that's, what's that about? What is the problem here? And a lot of it was an opportunity to bring forth this kind of constraint and they would punish churches for doing that or threaten to do so. And I think we could have appealed to the separation of church and state, in the sense that we have amendments that you cannot come in and cause our expressions of worship to be stopped. Very clear. And yet they were doing that on the sake of danger. And that was the conflict. And we are very fortunate to live in this little town here where the mayor did not enforce that. That was placed upon him by the Harris County people. They were here and they were observing, but they didn't shut us down. And sometimes we need to fight back and just instead of going along. I don't mean endanger people, but we were allowing people, if they didn't feel comfortable, not to show up. But there were a number of us that did. And I'm glad we got to keep worshiping God. And we have, I don't know of any other country in the world that would have those laws on their books. But we did. Why didn't we stand up with it more? Fear. And rightly so, we didn't know what this was. It's fear. And that will always be worked on to cause people to just do things that without thinking, that just it's going to do it. And our government's supposed to protect us. How'd that go? They were protecting money, they were protecting agendas, all of those things they were, and that's come out to be pretty evident. And so well, let's go get the science. And they were learning about the science and to realize that, I remember back in the old days, families would get their kids together when everybody had the measles because they could get immunity. And that's what could happen here. I know I looked at my immunity, and it was off the charts after I had it one time. Never got a shot. Didn't say that's wise or unwise. I just didn't do it. And I've never had a second chance with it. That's not with everybody. And but it was interesting. That was not even being allowed to be said publicly. There were doctors saying that, and they were silenced. And that's how quickly things can happen. And say, well, we'll just follow. We're sheep, and we'll be herded the way we want to. But we have an example here. Paul said, "Hey, is it right to do that?" And they backed off. They backed off. And I think that's kind of instructive in our day and time as well. How did Chief Captain obtain his Roman citizenship? Great sum of money. Don't know how much it was to do that, but you could pay a lot of money to have citizenship. But it's not like I was born Roman. That's what Paul can say. So our section here ends that he had bound him. He was afraid this, so they just depart from him. We're not going to do anything. But he's not through. The chief captain is not through with Paul, because in question number 30, as we go to the next lesson. On the morrow, desiring to know the certainty where he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him and commanded the chief priest and all the council to come together. And he brought Paul down and set him before them. I've been in the barracks. This is where we're going to examine the prisoner. I'm bringing him down to the council because he wanted to know what the issue was with Paul and the Jews. So we'll pick that up in here, lesson 20. Now, we got some identifications to do first. This is what we find in this section, and we won't go into detail with it because we will when we cover it. But who is Ananias as we go into chapter 23? Who is Ananias? He's the high priest. And here's the Sanhedrin. And he was one that from 47 AD to 59, he's the high priest. And of course, they would have others that would come in. Of course, that would be corrupted by politics and so forth. But he's the one in charge here of overseeing this council who's going to find out the issue with Paul. Who is Claudius Lysias? He's the chief captain. So he has a name. And how do we know his name? Because he's writing a letter. He was of the tribune. He was the one that would be in charge of overseeing this, ceasing this mob action against Paul, trying to get to the truth of things. It means he's a releaser. He's the one that's going to examine things and get things correct. And so we'll see how he is involved in this as well. Where or who or what is Caesarea? And here's where we have two Caesareas in our New Testament, do we not? What's the one you usually think about? You may think about this one, but you hear Caesarea Philippi? Caesarea Philippi? Herod's sons, one was Philip, and one of the tetrarchs, and the city was named after him. But it's a different place than what we see. It's kind of inner part of Palestine, and the Lux River and all of those things. But that's where it's called Caesarea Philippi. That's not the Caesarea we were talking about. This Caesarea is located where? That's right, coast of the Mediterranean. And it's there because Herod the Great built his castle. He built his palace. Different translations have that. Herod the Great did that. And it was where the procurators of Roman, trying to keep the peace, they would be there, like Felix. And we see Pontius Pilate earlier on, that indeed they would go there. And so there will be a trip from Jerusalem toward the northwest where Caesarea would be, and these things will happen in our story with Paul as well. So it's not Caesarea Philippi. It's Caesarea, still of Palestine, but it's also located on that Mediterranean coast. And he had a fabulous palace there. All right, who's Felix? He's a governor, procurator, in charge here. We see Pontius Pilate at first, but Around AD 53, we're looking at here. He's from 52 to 58 AD. He was in power. Pontius Pilate is 26 to 36, from my notes that I have. Festus is going to be 58 to 62, following Felix. So we see they were in power to keep the peace with the Roman government, with the Jews. And here was a problem that needed to be solved. So this chief captain, Claudius Lysias, is wanting to know things. And so here comes this bringing Paul, the prisoner. We want to find out what's the problem. We're not going to scourge him to examine him. Counsel, he's yours. And we've got to find out what's taking place. So why was Paul brought before the Sanhedrin council? He was wanting to know certainty whereof he was accused of the Jews. That's why he's brought there. I want to know for certain. We've got to deal with this man. So that's where the chief captain is involved, and he brings him down here, down to where the Sanhedrin would be. Paul was smitten on the mouth, his mouth. He was smitten. He was there. And we ask, why is that? Because all of these things are going to happen. He blasphemed the authority of the high priest. He claimed that he had lived before God in all good conscience. His opening remarks. Is that why? He believed in the resurrection and the existence of angels. He's going to cause a split among the Jews with that, or all of the above. What about A? I'm going to read it. Maybe I'll miss something. He said, "Brethren, I have lived before God in all good conscience of the day, and the high priest commanded that he stood by to smite him on the mouth." So you're right about that. Paul's confession is what I think is important. So we might say that might be part of it too. But he said, "Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall." And he said, "Insist thou to judge according to the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law." So here he was stating a fact about things, but he was also one that, and you're right about he smote him on the mouth because of that. But we kind of gather the fact of why Paul would do what he did. He had no respect for his authority, and that was a problem as well. But you're right about it. At that moment, he was smitten. So we might say A and B. I don't think all the above, because he gets into after he was smitten about that. But here he was smite him about living with all good conscience. And here, but Paul's response to him was, "Why have you smitten me, you whited wall?" and so forth. And we can talk about that. But there's how Paul felt about it, and Paul says, I don't have to defend myself. I've lived with all good conscience. I spoke evil about that, therefore I deserve to be smitten. I apologize. He didn't apologize for his conscience. He apologized in a sense what I shouldn't be doing that. And that's why I put the heavier weight upon Paul was smitten on the mouth because of his remarks about him. And but the smitting part, you might have your point's there. That's when he smit him. But what Paul responded to, I think, is what I think, maybe not the physical smiting, but the point is that he didn't say, "You should have hit me because I live in good conscience." He should do that. No, he did something wrong. And that's what he responds to. And that's what becomes very important too, about how we should respond to things. And do we talk evil about our rulers and so forth? That's in Exodus 22, verse 28. He blasphemed the authority of the high priest. And that's one of the things that It says, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, and you citizen judge me. So part of the smiting, God smites you. I'm responding to your smiting. So that's why I would say the A would be the authority. But he, excuse me? I know. Okay.
He said, since he had lived in all good conscience, and apparently Ananias took umbrage with that, and he wanted to smite him because he claimed he lived in all good conscience.
I acknowledge that.
And so for a narrow interpretation, I said,
Okay, you got it. I was just adding to it. Okay. Because he takes the scripture and he responds to his smiting. He responds to his smiting from Paul's perspective, not y'all. You got it right. Paul was smitten on the mouth because he said that. I'm responding how Paul looked at it, and I don't want to ignore that either. That's not the cause he got hit. He got hit because he said, I've lived with all good conscience. And part of my good conscience is that God should smite thee. That's when he responded to the smitten. So I'm just adding that to it, not discarding the other one. I don't know how else to say that. I agree with you. Where you could say B. But the whole story now surrounds the fact God smite you. And that's, he didn't, that was the wrong that he did, not because he lived with all good conscience. And so that would be the problem that I think the high priest would have. And that's why I'm thinking the response there, Paul looked on that way. I'm looking at it through the eyes of Paul, not chronological order.
Why don't you look at it through the eyes of Ananias? I think I'm defending.
It's fine.
Is that in Ananias, he didn't care what he said. You just blasphemed me.
No, how does he blaspheme him when he says, I've lived in all good conscience? That's his opening remarks.
So I just think that you have to say A too.
Well, I do too. But I understand the chronology. That's good about that. He just flies off the handle. But Paul doesn't go there, and I don't go there either because of that. But why Paul was smitten on the mouth because, and you got that right. He said, I lived with God before God with all good conscience. But Paul's response, God smite you. So why is Paul saying? So he said, this is, what I'm saying. When you're stating that I'm standing before God telling you the truth, that was very serious to Paul, and he was never lied about that. I tell you how many prayers I've been praying for you. God is my witness. And so that would be a given. You at least let somebody have that, but Ananias did not do that. He didn't smite him. He commanded that he be smitten for making such a point as that, because they knew he was violating his conscience. Because, see, he had been on their side before. I'm sure there was anger, and we're going to destroy you, and wouldn't let him speak. So your point about that is true, but I'm impressed with Paul when he wants to take the point about being smitten. He said, turn that on you. And this is when he goes over the line for himself. And if you were going to smite him, that would have been the point to do so. But Ananias smote him before. And therefore we're looking at it that way. I just want us to see the whole picture. So let's notice why he spoke about him as a whited wall. Why did Paul call Ananias a whited wall? That's right. You would make the tombs white, but what are inside of them? Filthiness. You've got iniquity within inside. Jesus would speak about that. You're a whited wall. You appear good before people, but really, and you're going to hold up the law. Thou whited wall, saidst thou to judge me according to the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? Oh, it wasn't really for his conscience sake, was it? What was contrary to the law? That's why he was smitten, from Paul's perspective. Well, you say conscience. Well, yeah, I'm sure that infuriated him. But what have we just seen in chapter 22? I'm a Roman citizen. It's contrary to the law. You uphold the law of the Jews in the sense that here you're bringing forth, you want to appear righteous before for them, but according to the law, but you are punishing me, you're smiting me contrary to the law. You're supposed to live with all good conscience. Ananias, wouldn't that be true? Yeah, it would be true. So from Ananias' standpoint, that's true. But Paul's standpoint is that you're violating the law, and then what happens, Paul says, I've learned to violate it. Why? He did not know he was the high priest. He did not know that. And I think that's how Paul has been dedicated to preaching the gospel. He didn't know who was in charge with that, because Paul didn't lie. So it's to me, the idea of see how Paul responded to that. Thou sittest to judge me according to the law, and command us to be smitten contrary to the law. Out of your anger you've done this, but this is against the law. You don't really want to uphold the whole law. The Roman army has just backed off me, but Ananias, you haven't. And you appear that. So he doesn't have respect for his character, but he had respect for the position. And that's what the law told him to do. He learns that from the law. So here's Paul's response to that. In verse 4, and they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? And Paul said, I knew not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. That's in the same verse where you're not going to revile God either. And you're not reviling the ruler of the people that God may set forth there. So there's where Paul is wrong on this occasion. And emotions are high. But Ananias, I'm sure he was angry and he smote, but he didn't realize if you're going to uphold the law, you better be careful how you do that. And Paul better be careful of what he just did. So he admits to that. But we're going to continue on there. That's not what the problem is, but it is at that particular moment. What should be our attitude to our nation's rulers? We may not like who's in charge and the character of the people. They may be hypocrites, but we do honor the position they hold and the authority that they have over us in our nation. And I think that's why Christians are good citizens. Any comments along that you might have? All right. How did Paul cause division among the Sadducees and the Pharisees? Yeah, the resurrection, and he hit a note with them too. What's the other part of it? The promise of the Sadducees and why are the Sadducees so sad? They're not going to be resurrection. Yeah, that's why the Sadducees are sad. The resurrection. But he says, there's more to that. He said, I'm a Pharisee, a son of the Pharisees, touching the hope and resurrection of the dead. I'm called in question. So when Paul perceived in verse 6 that there was part of them Sadducees and the Pharisees, it just split them. You know, he's there before the crowd. He's there before the Sanhedrin. And it's just divide and conquer. And that's what he's doing. And he's going to pull the Pharisees to his side. Well, that's evil? Not necessarily. Paul's doing it. And he always tells us when he repents, he's not repenting of this one, because he's stating the truth, and it's going to cause a problem with him. So I am a Pharisee, son of Pharisees, touching the hope and resurrection. Hope of what? Of the resurrection? Or the hope of heaven? And how do I get there? Resurrection. I got a hope that's reserved in heaven. How are we going to get there? We're going to be raised from the dead. And so I'm called in question about this, because that's what the gospel is about the blessings of it. And we have said there rose a dissension. And this word dissension means I'm standing my ground and they're standing their ground. I mean, it's a standoff. And therefore you have division between the Pharisees and Sadducees. And it was where they stood. And the assembly was divided. And he says, for the Sadducees, it says there is no resurrection. Neither what? Neither angel nor spirit. And the Pharisees do what? They both. Okay. So both. They confess, the Pharisees confess angels and spirits, or could it be angels and spirits are in one group and the resurrection's in another group, and that makes both? I think that's it. Because angels are what? They're spirits. And they will come and occupy a body. They will have a body presented when they appear before as messengers of God. But there's the spirit world and the angels. It doesn't exist with the Sadducees' thought process. So therefore, the resurrection is not going to happen. It's just this physical body. We know this for certain. So that angelic spirits and all those things, this was a sect of the Jews, and they did not believe in that. But the Pharisees did. And so there was the vision that happens there. So when there's verse 9, there arose my Bible says, great clamor. Is that a loud, boisterous problem going on? Clamor? Yes. And some of the scribes of the Pharisees they stood up and they strove, saying, what? We find no evil in this man. And what if a spirit has spoken to him, or an angel? What if a spirit has spoken to him, or an angel? There again, you might say, well, angel and spirit are distinguished as both. You're not even talking about the resurrection. That's a given. But the idea, one could be a spirit, but not one sent by God. Maybe an angel has sent that. So you can see why he would use the word both for angel and spirit as well. And that you can make your decision on that. But the sense is that maybe it did. Who's to say? We don't find any evil in this man that he's done. Isn't it funny when people you agree with them that they're okay because they're agreeing with you, and they're not if they don't, and that's not striving for truth. But that's what they say. And there arose a great dissension again. The chief captain fearing lest Paul should be what? He's going to be torn to pieces. We got to get him out of here. And so what do? They go down and take him by force from among them, and they take him into the barracks, the castle, where the Roman army could take care of him. But the night following, the Lord stood by him, and here's a second time where the Lord appears to him. I'm going to take you to the Gentiles, but what does he say here now? For thou hast be of good cheer. And you think about things that hadn't been going too well for Paul. They said, be of good cheer. For thou hast testified concerning me at Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also where? In Rome. So that's good news. But we know how Paul will go that way too. It's not a pleasant voyage. It's not a pleasant thing to be incarcerated, but he's going to be able to testify. We'll do that. All right, we'll have to stop there. Next time to question number 12. And when it was day, the Jews banded together. And just we want to talk about, is this a good example of God's providence? Not miraculous intervention, but God's providence and making sure that Paul gets to go to Rome. And what providence is something. Is there any miraculous event that happens here that would state that this was a miracle that happened? Or was it just providence, God working things together and to bring about an end for him? That's That was for Paul's benefit. And we'll talk about that next time. Thank you.